The morning sun painted the Arizona desert in shades of gold and amber, as Joseph Running Bear adjusted the worn leather saddle on his faithful horse, Thundercloud. The Apache warrior had inherited this magnificent stallion from his grandfather, a legendary chief who had ridden these same trails decades before the white settlers arrived. Thundercloud was no ordinary horse. His coat gleamed like polished obsidian, and his spirit burned as fierce as the desert wind. Among the Apache people, owning such a horse meant everything. It represented freedom, survival, and connection to their ancestors. Joseph lived in a small settlement on the outskirts of the reservation, where life moved at the rhythm of ancient traditions mixed with the harsh realities of modern times. His wooden cabin sat nestled between towering red rocks, and behind it stood a modest barn where Thundercloud spent his nights. The barn had been built by Joseph's own hands, each plank carefully chosen and fitted with the patience his grandfather had taught him. Though simple, it sheltered his most precious possession and held the tools of his trade as a guide for travelers crossing the treacherous desert paths. That particular morning, Joseph planned to ride to the nearby town of Copper Creek to trade some handmade leather goods for supplies his family desperately needed. His wife, Maria, was expecting their second child, and winter was approaching faster than usual. The trading post owner, Mr. Henderson, had promised good prices for Joseph's craftsmanship, and the Apache warrior knew this trip could provide enough money to last through the cold months ahead. He secured his leather pouches to Thundercloud's saddle, each one filled with intricately beaded belts, moccasins, and small decorative items that showcased generations of Apache artistry. As Joseph guided Thundercloud along the winding desert trail, the familiar landscape brought him peace. Saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels against the cloudless sky, their arms raised in permanent prayer to the sun. The horse's hooves created a steady rhythm on the hard-packed earth, and Joseph felt the deep connection between rider and animal that had sustained his people for countless generations. This was more than transportation. It was partnership, understanding, and mutual respect that ran deeper than words could express. The trail to Copper Creek wound through a narrow canyon, where ancient petroglyphs told stories of hunts, ceremonies, and daily life from centuries past. Joseph always slowed Thundercloud to a walk in this sacred place, showing respect for the spirits of his ancestors who had carved these messages into the rock walls. The canyon provided shelter from the desert wind and created an almost cathedral-like atmosphere where every sound echoed softly against the towering stone walls. As they emerged from the canyon's protection, Joseph spotted something unusual ahead on the trail. A massive figure sat hunched beside a large boulder, head bowed in apparent exhaustion or despair. Even from a distance, Joseph could see this was no ordinary traveler. The man's enormous frame suggested he stood well over 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown deer. Something about his posture spoke of defeat and weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. Thundercloud snorted nervously as they approached, sensing something different about the stranger. Joseph's hand instinctively moved to the knife at his belt, not out of aggression but from the natural caution his grandfather had drilled into him since childhood. The desert could be dangerous, and travelers sometimes carried more trouble than their packs could hold. Yet something in the giant's defeated posture stirred Joseph's compassion rather than his fear. "Friend," Joseph called out in English, his voice carrying clearly across the desert air. "Are you in need of help?" The enormous man looked up, revealing a face marked by both physical pain and emotional exhaustion. His clothes, though travel-worn and dusty, suggested he had once known better times. Most striking were his legs. One appeared normal, but the other was clearly damaged, twisted in a way that would make walking extremely difficult. The man's eyes, however, held no malice or deception, only the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from fighting battles no one else can see. "I am Thomas," the giant replied, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone of his intimidating size. "I fear I have traveled as far as these old bones will carry me. My leg gave out completely yesterday, and I have been sitting here wondering if this rocky patch of desert will become my final resting place." Joseph dismounted Thundercloud and approached the stranger with careful respect. The Apache way taught that every person carried their own medicine, their own purpose in the great web of life. Perhaps this meeting was no accident. As he drew closer, Joseph could see the extent of Thomas's disability. His left leg was severely deformed, likely from birth, and walking even short distances must have required tremendous effort and caused considerable pain. "Where were you headed, Thomas?" Joseph asked, settling into a comfortable squat beside the boulder. "This trail leads to Copper Creek, but it's still many miles ahead." Thomas managed a weak smile. Copper Creek was indeed my destination. I heard there might be work there for someone willing to do heavy labor. Despite my limitations, I've been walking for 3 days, sleeping under the stars and rationing the little water I carried. But this morning, my legs simply refused to support me any longer. Joseph studied the giant's face and saw truth in his words. There was no shame in Thomas's admission, only honest acknowledgement of his physical reality. The Apache warrior felt a stirring in his chest, the same feeling his grandfather had described when the spirits guided important decisions. Thundercloud stood nearby, occasionally pawing the ground and shaking his magnificent head, almost as if he too sensed the significance of this moment. "The sun grows hot," Joseph observed, noting how Thomas's skin already showed signs of dehydration and exposure. "And the desert shows no mercy to those caught without proper preparation." "You cannot remain here," Thomas nodded grimly. "I know. I've been trying to gather enough strength for one final push, but I'm not certain my body will cooperate. Perhaps if I rest until evening, when the temperature drops." Joseph stood and walked back to Thundercloud, running his hands along the horse's neck while his mind worked through the situation. The Apache way emphasized that true wealth came not from what a person accumulated, but from what they were willing to share when others faced genuine need. His grandfather's words echoed in his memory. "A warrior's strength is measured not by what he can take, but by what he can give, when giving costs him dearly." Quote. The practical side of Joseph's mind calculated the challenges. Copper Creek was still 8 miles away over rough terrain. Thomas's size meant that even riding, Thundercloud would be carrying an enormous burden under the blazing desert sun. More concerning was the return journey. If Joseph gave up his horse to help Thomas reach town, how would he get home to his pregnant wife? The trading mission would have to be abandoned, meaning his family would face winter without the supplies they desperately needed. Yet as Joseph looked at Thomas, then at his beloved Thundercloud, then back at the suffering giant, his choice became clear. The Apache belief system held that all life was interconnected, and helping another in genuine need created positive energy that would eventually return in unexpected ways. His grandfather had taught him that the spirits often tested a person's character by presenting difficult choices where doing the right thing required significant personal sacrifice. "Thomas," Joseph said, his voice steady and determined, "I'm going to help you reach Copper Creek. Thundercloud is strong and has carried heavier loads through more challenging terrain than this." The giant's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been hope. "I couldn't ask you to do that. Your horse is clearly valuable, and I have nothing to offer in return. Besides, I must weigh nearly 300 pounds. That's too much to ask of any animal." "Though," Joseph smiled, feeling the rightness of his decision settle into his bones like warm sunlight. "Thundercloud has Apache blood in his veins, just as I do. We don't abandon travelers in need, especially when we have the means to help. My grandfather always said that a horse's true value isn't measured in what someone might pay for him, but in the lives he helps save and the kindness he helps deliver." With gentle efficiency born from years of experience, Joseph helped Thomas to his feet and supported him as they approached Thundercloud. The great horse stood perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of the moment. Getting someone of Thomas's size and limited mobility onto the horse required patience and careful maneuvering, but eventually the giant sat securely in the saddle, his massive frame making Thundercloud appear almost small by comparison. Joseph took the reins and began walking alongside the horse, setting a pace that would be sustainable under the growing heat of the day. As they moved forward along the dusty trail, Thomas repeatedly expressed his gratitude, but Joseph waved away the thanks with characteristic Apache humility. This was simply what decent people did for one another when circumstances demanded it. The journey to Copper Creek took most of the day, with regular stops to rest Thundercloud and allow both men to drink from Joseph's water supply. During these breaks, Thomas shared pieces of his story. How a childhood accident had left him with his disability. How he'd struggled to find work that didn't require perfect mobility, and how he'd heard that the mining operations around Copper Creek might offer opportunities for someone willing to work hard despite physical limitations. Joseph listened with the patience his culture valued, offering occasional words of encouragement but mostly providing the gift of genuine attention. He learned that Thomas was educated, well-spoken, and possessed a gentle spirit that seemed incongruous with his intimidating physical presence. The giant spoke of his dreams with quiet dignity. Modest hopes for steady work, a small place to call home, and perhaps eventually the chance to help others who faced similar challenges. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the buildings of Copper Creek finally appeared in the distance like a mirage shimmering in the desert heat. Thomas's relief was palpable, but Joseph felt a growing weight in his chest as he contemplated the return journey, walking 8 miles back to his cabin in the dark, across terrain that could be treacherous, even for someone who knew it well, would be dangerous. More than that, he would return home empty-handed, having accomplished none of the trading he'd planned. When they reached the outskirts of town, Joseph helped Thomas down from Thundercloud's back. The giant's legs trembled with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes shone with gratitude that seemed to illuminate his entire face. He grasped Joseph's hand in both of his enormous ones, and for a moment neither man spoke. "I will never forget this kindness," Thomas finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just save my life today. You reminded me that there is still goodness in the world, still people willing to sacrifice for strangers. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Joseph mounted Thundercloud and gathered the reins, preparing for the long journey home. "The spirits will find a way to balance the scales, Thomas. Take care of yourself, and when you're established here, perhaps you can help the next traveler who finds himself in desperate circumstances." As Joseph rode out of Copper Creek, leaving Thomas to find his way to the boarding house they'd located, the Apache warrior felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in having done the right thing warred with concern about explaining to Maria why he was returning without the supplies they needed. The practical challenges hadn't disappeared. Winter was still coming, his wife was still pregnant, and their resources remained insufficient for the months ahead. The return journey passed in contemplative silence, with only Thundercloud's steady hoofbeats and the evening songs of desert creatures for company. Stars began appearing in the vast sky overhead, and Joseph found himself thinking about his grandfather's teachings regarding the invisible connections that bound all living things together. Perhaps this day's events were part of a larger pattern he couldn't yet see. When Joseph finally reached his cabin well after midnight, Maria was waiting for him with a mixture of relief and concern. She could see immediately that something significant had happened, both from his empty hands and from the thoughtful expression on his weathered face. As they sat together in their modest kitchen, sharing simple food and hot coffee, Joseph told her about his encounter with Thomas and the choice he'd made. Maria listened without judgment, her hands resting on her growing belly as she considered her husband's words. Finally, she reached across the table and touched his calloused hand. "You did what your heart and your heritage demanded," she said quietly. "Our baby will be born into a world where kindness still matters because of choices like yours. The spirits will provide what we need." As Joseph led Thundercloud to the barn that night, he felt a deep sense of peace despite the uncertainties that lay ahead. The barn looked exactly as he'd left it that morning, simple, functional, and containing nothing more valuable than hay, a few tools, and the lingering scent of leather and horses. Yet somehow it felt different, as if the very air held new possibilities. 3 weeks passed, after Joseph's encounter with Thomas, and life in the small Apache settlement continued its familiar rhythm despite the approaching winter. Each morning, Joseph rose before dawn to tend to Thundercloud and prepare for whatever work the day might bring. Without the supplies he had planned to purchase in Copper Creek, the family had to be more creative and resourceful than ever. Maria had begun trading her excellent weaving skills with neighboring families, exchanging beautiful blankets for food and other necessities. Joseph found odd jobs around the settlement and in nearby areas, helping neighbors repair their homes, guiding the occasional traveler through difficult terrain, and using his skills to fashion useful items from materials others might consider worthless. His reputation for reliability and craftsmanship had always served him well, but now he threw himself into these activities with renewed purpose. Every dollar earned helped prepare for the baby's arrival and the challenging winter months ahead. Thundercloud seemed to sense the increased urgency in their daily routine. The magnificent horse responded to Joseph's guidance with even greater attentiveness than usual, as if understanding that their partnership faced new challenges. During their rides across the desert to various work sites, Joseph often found himself talking to the horse about his decision to help Thomas, working through any lingering doubts about whether he had made the right choice for his family. The Apache community rallied around Joseph and Maria during this time, demonstrating the deep bonds that held their people together through both prosperity and hardship. Elder women brought Maria herbal teas that would help with her pregnancy, while the men made sure Joseph knew about every available opportunity for work. Children played around Thundercloud whenever he was in the settlement, and the horse seemed to enjoy their attention, standing perfectly still while small hands petted his glossy coat. One evening, as Joseph was repairing a section of fence that surrounded their small property, Maria called out from the cabin's doorway. Her voice carried an unusual note of excitement that made him look up immediately from his work. She was holding something in her hand and gesturing for him to come inside quickly. "Joseph," she said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "A man just rode through asking specifically for you. He left this envelope and said it was very important that you receive it personally. He wouldn't tell me what it was about, just that someone named Thomas had sent him to find you." Joseph wiped his hands on his shirt and took the envelope, noting immediately that it was made of expensive paper and sealed with genuine wax, rather than the simple glue most people used. His name was written across the front in careful, educated handwriting that somehow seemed familiar. Inside, he found a letter written in the same precise script, along with something else that made his heart skip a beat, a banknote for more money than he had ever seen at one time. The letter began with Thomas's heartfelt gratitude for Joseph's kindness, and went on to explain what had happened since their parting in Copper Creek. The mining company had indeed hired Thomas, but not for the manual labor he had expected. Instead, they discovered that his education and natural intelligence made him valuable in ways his physical limitations couldn't diminish. Within 2 weeks, he had been promoted to a supervisory position that paid far more than he had dared to hope. But the most remarkable part of Thomas's story was yet to come. The letter explained that his new position had brought him into contact with a wealthy mine owner named Marcus Goldstein, a man who had built his fortune through careful investments and treating his workers fairly. When Thomas mentioned Joseph's extraordinary kindness, describing how the Apache warrior had sacrificed his own plans to help a stranger in need, Marcus had been deeply moved by the story. Marcus, it turned out, had spent years looking for ways to identify and reward genuine acts of selfless kindness, believing that such behavior deserved recognition and support. He had established a private foundation that quietly sought out stories of people who helped others without expectation of reward, then found ways to acknowledge their compassion in meaningful ways. Thomas's account of Joseph's sacrifice had particularly impressed him because it demonstrated kindness across cultural and racial boundaries, something Marcus valued highly. The banknote in the envelope represented more than just financial assistance. It was Marcus's way of ensuring that Joseph's family would not suffer because of his generous choice. The amount was carefully calculated to cover not only their immediate winter needs, but also to provide a foundation for future stability. Additionally, the letter mentioned that Marcus had established a standing order with the general store in Copper Creek, allowing Joseph to purchase supplies as needed throughout the winter months. Joseph read the letter 3 times before its contents fully registered, and Maria had to steady him when his knees seemed to lose their strength. The money represented more than they had earned in the previous 6 months combined. But beyond its practical value, the recognition of his actions touched something deep in the Apache warrior's soul. His grandfather had always taught that good deeds created positive energy that would eventually return. But Joseph had never imagined it might happen so directly or dramatically. That night, Joseph and Maria sat together planning how to use this unexpected windfall wisely. They would purchase the winter supplies they needed, ensure proper preparation for the baby's arrival, and set aside enough to help them through any future emergencies. But Maria also suggested they find ways to help others in their community who faced similar struggles, creating a cycle of assistance that would honor both Thomas's gratitude and Marcus's generosity. The next morning brought another surprise that left Joseph questioning whether he was still dreaming. As he approached the barn to check on Thundercloud, he noticed the door stood slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered securing it the night before. Concerned that someone might have attempted to steal his horse, Joseph hurried forward and pushed the door fully open, then stopped completely, unable to process what he was seeing. The barn had been transformed overnight into something that defied explanation. Where yesterday there had been simple wooden walls, hay-covered floors, and basic tools, now there were carefully arranged displays of items that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Shelves that hadn't existed before lined the walls, holding objects of such beauty and apparent value that Joseph wondered if he was experiencing some kind of vision. Ancient pottery sat alongside modern silver jewelry, each piece crafted with a level of skill that spoke of master artisans. Hand-woven textiles in patterns Joseph had never seen before hung from wooden beams that looked newly installed, but somehow felt as if they had always been part of the barn's structure. Tools made from precious metals lay arranged on workbenches that appeared to be constructed from wood that didn't grow anywhere in the surrounding desert. Most remarkable of all were the numerous containers filled with what appeared to be rare stones, precious metals, and other valuable materials. Some held turquoise of a quality that would make any jewelry maker weep with envy, while others contained silver nuggets that gleamed like captured moonlight. There were containers of gold dust, rare beads from far-off lands, and gems that seemed to capture and reflect light in ways that natural stones shouldn't be able to accomplish. Thundercloud stood calmly in his usual stall, completely unperturbed by the miraculous transformation around him. The horse looked at Joseph with what almost seemed like gentle amusement, as if he had been expecting this moment and was pleased that his human companion was finally witnessing it. Everything about the horse's demeanor suggested that these changes were not only natural, but somehow necessary. Joseph moved through the transformed barn like a man in a dream, touching various items to confirm their reality. Each object felt solid and real under his fingers, but many possessed qualities that seemed to transcend ordinary craftsmanship. A simple clay pot radiated warmth without any visible heat source, while a silver bracelet seemed to sing with barely audible music when he lifted it from its resting place. As Joseph explored his mysteriously transformed barn, he began to notice patterns in the arrangement of items that suggested intention rather than random placement. The pottery was grouped according to tribal styles from various Native American cultures, many of which he recognized from his grandfather's teachings about the diverse peoples who had inhabited these lands for thousands of years. The jewelry represented techniques from around the world, as if someone wanted to display the universal human impulse to create beauty from simple materials. The tools particularly captured Joseph's attention because they seemed specifically chosen for someone with his skills and interests. There were leather-working implements of a quality he had only dreamed of owning, wood-carving tools that felt perfectly balanced in his hands, and metalworking equipment that would allow him to create jewelry rivaling anything produced by professional artisans. Each tool seemed to have been crafted specifically for his hands, his techniques, and his creative vision. In one corner of the barn, Joseph discovered something that made his heart race with possibilities. A collection of rare books sat neatly arranged on a shelf that definitely hadn't been there the day before. The volumes covered topics ranging from traditional Apache crafts and stories to advanced techniques for working with precious metals and stones. Some were written in English, others in Spanish, and a few appeared to be in languages he didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar. As the morning progressed and Joseph continued to explore his transformed barn, he began to understand that this was more than just a collection of valuable objects. It represented a complete workshop and gallery that would allow him to pursue his crafts at a level he had never imagined possible. With these tools and materials, he could create items that would command high prices from collectors and tourists, ensuring his family's financial security for years to come. The transformation also included practical improvements that made the barn more functional as both a workshop and a stable. Better lighting had appeared from sources he couldn't identify, ventilation had improved dramatically, and the entire structure felt more solid and weatherproof than it had since Joseph built it years earlier. Thundercloud's stall had been enhanced with softer bedding and an automatic watering system that seemed to operate through some mechanism Joseph couldn't locate. By mid-morning, Maria had joined Joseph in the barn, and her amazement at the overnight transformation matched his own. Together, they tried to develop logical explanations for what had occurred, but every theory seemed insufficient to account for the completeness and perfection of the changes. The items weren't just valuable. They were exactly what Joseph needed to transform his modest craft business into something significant. As they stood together in the transformed space, Maria placed her hand on her growing belly and spoke the thought that had been forming in both their minds. "This is connected to your kindness to Thomas," she said quietly. "I don't understand how or why, but the spirits have responded to your sacrifice by providing not just what we need, but everything necessary to help others as well." Joseph nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his understanding like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. The barn's transformation wasn't just about rewarding his past kindness, it was about enabling future acts of generosity and service to his community. With these tools and materials, he could create beautiful items that would provide steady income, while also teaching young people the traditional crafts that were in danger of being lost. That afternoon, Joseph rode Thundercloud into the settlement to share the news with the tribal elders and seek their wisdom about how to proceed. The old men listened to his story with the patient attention they gave to all matters involving spiritual phenomena, asking occasional questions but mostly allowing Joseph to describe everything he had witnessed. When he finished his account, the eldest member of the council, a man named Daniel Crowfeather who was approaching his 90th birthday, smiled with satisfaction rather than surprise. "Your grandfather would be proud," the old man said simply. "He always taught that the spirits watch for those who honor the old ways, even when it costs them dearly. This transformation is not magic. It is the natural response of the universe to genuine kindness." The winter that followed proved to be one of the most prosperous and fulfilling periods of Joseph's life, though not in ways he could have anticipated. When he first encountered Thomas on that dusty desert trail, the transformed barn became the center of a remarkable enterprise that touched the lives of countless people throughout the region. Word spread quickly about the Apache craftsman who could create jewelry and leather goods of extraordinary beauty, and customers began making special trips from distant cities to see his work. Joseph approached his newfound resources with the same careful respect his grandfather had taught him to show toward all gifts from the spirits. Rather than overwhelming himself with the possibilities, he began slowly, experimenting with different materials and techniques, while maintaining the traditional methods that had been passed down through generations of Apache artisans. The results exceeded even his most optimistic expectations, as if the materials themselves wanted to be transformed into objects of beauty and significance. The first piece Joseph completed using his enhanced workshop was a silver and turquoise necklace designed for Maria to wear after their baby's birth. The turquoise seemed to glow with inner light, and the silver flowed into patterns that felt both ancient and timeless. When Maria first wore the finished piece, other women in the settlement gathered around her, marveling at its beauty and asking where such exceptional work could be obtained. This led to Joseph's first commission from within his own community. An elderly woman named Grace Singing Wolf asked him to create a special bracelet for her granddaughter's coming-of-age ceremony. The girl had been struggling with her identity, caught between traditional Apache ways and the pressures of modern American culture. Grace hoped that wearing something beautiful and distinctly Apache might help her granddaughter connect more deeply with her heritage. Joseph poured his heart into the project, using traditional Apache symbols while incorporating innovative techniques made possible by his new tools. The finished bracelet told the story of a young woman's journey from childhood to adulthood, with each silver element representing a different stage of growth and understanding. When the girl received her bracelet during the ceremony, tears flowed down her cheeks as she felt the weight of her ancestors' love and wisdom in the carefully crafted metal. This success led to more requests from families wanting special pieces for important occasions: weddings, graduations, spiritual ceremonies, and memorials for departed loved ones. Joseph discovered that his enhanced abilities extended beyond mere technical skill. He seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of what each person needed, what symbols would speak most powerfully to their hearts, and how to imbue his creations with emotional resonance that transcended their material value. As his reputation grew, Joseph began receiving visits from people outside the immediate Apache community. A Hispanic family drove 8 hours from Albuquerque after hearing about his work, seeking rings for their daughter's quinceañera celebration. A group of teachers from the Navajo Nation commissioned educational materials that could help preserve traditional crafting techniques for future generations. Even some wealthy collectors from Phoenix and Tucson began making appointments to see his most elaborate pieces. The financial success that resulted from these commissions allowed Joseph and Maria to prepare for their baby's arrival without any of the anxiety they had previously felt about winter expenses. They purchased everything needed for the nursery, stocked their pantry with enough food to last through the coldest months, and even had sufficient resources to help other families in the settlement who faced similar challenges. But the most profound changes weren't financial. The transformed barn had become a gathering place where young people from the settlement could learn traditional crafts from Joseph, while also being exposed to techniques and materials they had never encountered before. Several teenagers showed remarkable aptitude for jewelry making, while others gravitated toward leatherwork or pottery. Joseph found himself becoming not just a craftsman but a teacher and mentor, passing on knowledge that bridged ancient wisdom with contemporary possibilities. One of his most dedicated students was a 16-year-old boy named Miguel Santos, whose Mexican-American family had moved to the area recently. Miguel had been struggling to find his place in the predominantly Native American community, feeling like an outsider despite his family's genuine respect for Apache culture. Under Joseph's guidance, Miguel discovered a natural talent for working with precious metals, and his pieces began incorporating design elements that honored both his Mexican heritage and his newfound appreciation for Apache traditions. The collaboration between Joseph and Miguel resulted in several pieces that perfectly exemplified the cultural bridge building that the transformed barn seemed to encourage. Their joint creation of a large ceremonial piece for the settlement's annual harvest celebration featured silver work techniques from Mexican artisans, combined with Apache symbols and turquoise from the barn's remarkable collection. The finished piece became a symbol of how different cultures could honor each other while maintaining their distinct identities. As winter deepened, Joseph received an unexpected visit that brought his remarkable journey full circle. Thomas arrived one snowy evening, having made the difficult trip specifically to see how Joseph was faring. The giant had continued to prosper in Copper Creek, eventually becoming a partner in the mining operation and using his success to help other disabled individuals find meaningful employment. His health had improved dramatically once he was no longer forced to perform physically demanding labor, and his natural leadership abilities had earned him respect throughout the community. Thomas's amazement at the barn's transformation matched everyone else's initial reaction, but his response went deeper. As someone who had experienced Joseph's kindness firsthand, he understood better than most observers that these miraculous changes represented more than material reward. They embodied the principle that genuine compassion creates ripple effects that extend far beyond the original act of kindness. During Thomas's visit, he shared news that added another layer of meaning to Joseph's story. Marcus Goldstein, the mine owner who had sent the initial financial assistance, had been so moved by the continuing reports of Joseph's community impact that he had established a scholarship program for Native American students interested in traditional arts. The program would provide funding for young people to study with master craftsmen like Joseph, ensuring that ancient techniques would survive and evolve rather than disappearing under the pressures of modernization. Furthermore, Marcus had arranged for a gallery in Santa Fe to host an exhibition of Joseph's work, with proceeds supporting education programs for indigenous artists throughout the Southwest. The exhibition would introduce Joseph's creations to collectors and art lovers from around the world, while providing a platform to share Apache culture and values with audiences who might otherwise never encounter them. The spring following that remarkable winter brought the birth of Joseph and Maria's daughter, whom they named Luna Sky, in honor of the celestial beauty that had seemed to guide their family's transformation. The baby arrived healthy and strong during a gentle rainstorm that broke a long drought, an event the tribal elders interpreted as another positive sign of the spiritual forces that had been supporting the family. Luna Sky's birth coincided with the completion of Joseph's most ambitious project yet, a comprehensive collection of jewelry and decorative objects that told the story of Apache history from ancient times through the present day. Each piece incorporated traditional symbols and techniques, while using materials and tools from his transformed workshop. The collection would travel to museums and cultural centers throughout the country, educating people about Apache heritage while demonstrating how traditional arts could thrive in contemporary settings. As spring turned to summer, the barn's influence continued to expand in unexpected directions. Anthropologists from the University of Arizona began documenting Joseph's techniques and the stories behind his creations, recognizing that his work represented an important evolution in Native American arts. Art therapists started referring clients to Joseph's workshops, discovering that the process of creating beautiful objects with one's hands had remarkable healing properties for people dealing with trauma or depression. The most surprising development came when representatives from the Smithsonian Institution contacted Joseph about including some of his pieces in a major exhibition about American craftsmanship. The invitation represented not just personal recognition but acknowledgement that Apache culture continued to produce art of national significance. Joseph accepted the honor while insisting that any accompanying materials emphasize the community traditions and spiritual beliefs that made his work possible. Throughout all these developments, Joseph never forgot the moment of choice that had set everything in motion. His decision to help Thomas, despite the personal cost. He often shared this story with visitors to his workshop, not to emphasize his own virtue, but to illustrate how small acts of kindness could generate outcomes far beyond human imagination or planning. The barn's transformation had taught him that the universe operates according to principles of reciprocity and balance that transcend ordinary cause and effect. As the first anniversary of his encounter with Thomas approached, Joseph decided to undertake a special project that would honor all the people whose kindness had contributed to his family's remarkable journey. Working with materials from every corner of his magical workshop, he crafted a large ceremonial piece designed to be permanently displayed in the settlement's community center. The piece incorporated elements representing the many cultures and individuals who had played roles in his story. Apache symbols for his own heritage, Mexican influences honoring Miguel's contributions, and abstract patterns representing the mysterious forces that had transformed his barn. The dedication ceremony for this piece became a celebration of the entire community's growth and increasing prosperity. Joseph's success had attracted other businesses and artists to the area, creating opportunities for everyone while preserving the traditional values that made the settlement special. Young people who might once have left seeking opportunities elsewhere now saw possibilities for meaningful careers that honored their heritage while providing economic security. During the ceremony, Daniel Crow Feather, the elderly tribal council member, spoke about the deeper meanings embedded in Joseph's journey. "Our young brother learned what the ancestors always knew," the old man said, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "When we give from the heart, without counting the cost, we open ourselves to receive gifts beyond our understanding." The barn's transformation was not magic. It was the natural response of creation to authentic love. As the ceremony concluded and families began sharing food and stories under the desert stars, Joseph stood with Maria and baby Luna Sky beside Thundercloud, the horse whose steady presence had made the original act of kindness possible. The magnificent stallion had also benefited from the barn's transformation, becoming healthier and more vigorous than ever. Yet his most important quality remained unchanged: the deep trust and partnership that bound him to Joseph, in service of whatever challenges or opportunities the future might bring. Looking back at his transformed barn, now glowing softly in the evening light, Joseph felt profound gratitude for every element that had contributed to his family's remarkable year. Thomas's appearance on the trail, his own decision to sacrifice immediate gain for another person's welfare, Marcus's generous recognition, and the mysterious forces that had transformed his simple workshop into something extraordinary. All had combined to create a life richer than anything he had previously imagined possible. But perhaps the most valuable transformation had been internal. Joseph had discovered that his capacity for kindness was not diminished by giving but actually increased through practice. Each act of generosity, whether toward Thomas, his students, or the many visitors who sought his help, had strengthened his ability to recognize and respond to others' needs. The barn's physical changes simply reflected this inner growth, providing tools that matched his expanded vision of service to his community and culture. As the family prepared for bed that night, with Luna Sky sleeping peacefully in her beautifully crafted cradle and Thundercloud settling comfortably in his enhanced stall, Joseph reflected on his grandfather's teaching that every ending contains a new beginning. The story of the transformed barn was really just the opening chapter of a larger narrative about how compassion could reshape not just individual lives but entire communities, creating ripples of positive change that would continue expanding for generations to come.